Amy Boyle is a Chicago-based photographer, podcaster, and mentor who showcases phenomenal women and writes about creativity. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Magazine, among others. She is an Oprah O Magazine insider. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Amy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I recently had a friend of mine on who is an adventurer, and we talked a little bit about how instead of just having one-off trips and adventures, you can kind of make adventure a way of life and you can live adventurously. How does a person do that with creativity and live a creative life rather than just thinking in terms of projects and photographs?
Well, for me, I would say it really stems back to when I was a child. I was very fortunate to have very supportive parents that, I grew up pre-internet, home computer and all that sort of thing. So they loved to bring home arts and crafts for me. So my dad, his favorite place to hang out when he wasn't at work, he was a physician, but he'd go to Carlson Art Supply and bring back paints and pens and clay. And that was something we did together, and something that for me, when I have idle time, I'm thinking not only in the medium, so I'm a photographer, right? But I also like to draw. I like to sketch. I sometimes paint, really get into music. So I think it's just constantly keeping your inspiration around you.
And that kind of brings up an interesting point. I mean, what would be your advice to parents to make that accessible? It sounds like you had a really good start there.
Yeah, I just, my husband and I have 4 sons. They're now all grown, but when they were little, it was the same sort of thing. I just think that anytime you can introduce a good distraction, a different way of looking at things, kids and adults get frustrated with certain things. So sometimes you can figure things out by playing with a different medium, like taking something apart, putting it back together. I think that there's something, a lot of people I've had come up to me and say, well, I'm not creative. I'm like, well, guess what? I think everybody is. It's just a matter of giving yourself the opportunity to acknowledge it, even if it's, 1 minute at a time. But there's some fun ways to just be curious.
Why do you think, or do you think that always having a screen in your hand and this kind of constant connection, do you think that's harmful to the maybe like mental state that like it seems like you're describing almost like a good kind of boredom where there's nothing to do, so let's do an art project, or I'm sitting with my thoughts long enough to turn them into something creative. It sounds to me like phones really get in the way of that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. And when I find that I'm just scrolling, my husband likes to call it mindless scrolling, right? So you just, there you go. And when that happens, I'm not being creative. I'm not putting out, I'm consuming, but I'm not even consuming anymore. So do I think phones are a detriment? Yes, because without proper self-discipline, keep yourself to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. It's so easily can lead to too much time. And then how do you get that momentum back? Because now you maybe scrolled so far that you're in this comparison game, right? What are these other people doing that I'm not doing? Oh, I can never do this because they're doing that. Well, put away the thing that is talking to you. It's like, if you don't like what you're hearing, turn off Fox News. Turn this off. Turn it off. Just go walk away from this, and maybe you'll find. It's scary sometimes to dig within what's going on for ourselves, but I think that's where all the magic happens, and we should be kinder to ourselves to spend that time away from our devices the best we can.
Turn off Fox News. Pretty good advice.
Sorry, a little political there.
No, it's true though. I mean, for anyone, I don't even think that is politically slanted. I would argue that whatever your views are, you'd be better off reading an article by someone who has thought an argument through and taken the time to put it in writing rather than just knowing if they phrase things in a way that's designed to make you angry. You will sit through the commercials to hear the next insightful or incendiary thing. With regards to like phones and photography, I've heard people, there's that argument of the best camera is the one you have with you. And there's been this real move towards like minimalism in recent years of gear because everyone can take great pictures with their phones. But I found if I'm in a rut, there's nothing like buying a lens or buying even a new camera or maybe trying Polaroids for a while or whatever. Do you believe in that, like gear acquisition as a gateway drug to creativity?
Well, it's definitely can be problematic for your budget, your pocketbook, if nothing else. Yeah, I do believe that the best equipment is what you use. And it would be nice if it wasn't just our phones. Certainly, there's so many kinds of cameras and lenses and things. And it's so easy to get caught up in the shiny object syndrome where you need to buy and acquire to create, which, one of my frustrations is when I'm shooting an event or something and, eventually someone will walk up to me and go, that's a really nice camera, but it takes great pictures. I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. It walks around this place and does it all by itself. Isn't that cool? And you're like, no. So someone has to know how to use the gear. That's one thing. You have to make it work for you. And going back to the creativity side of it, you have to be curious to know what are the limits. So that means sitting with it for a while, maybe taking 1,000 pictures that you'll never show anybody so that you can get to your style, to your look. It's just kind of a pretty cool thing when you get to sit and play with the gear that you have to master the craft that you want to achieve.
That's such a funny one. It's like my camera thanks you.
Yeah, right. You're just like, no. So frustrating. Yeah.
So I want to ask a couple of advice questions for people on sort of different places on their journey as a photographer. And maybe one of the most useful or most like broadly useful one would be this, like, what would be your advice to someone who doesn't consider themselves a photographer and they're not aspiring to any kind of craft or whatever, but they want to just take better pictures, whether it's of their kids or their friends, whatever. What are some really small improvements you can make that kind of make the biggest difference to improving your photography skills?
Absolutely. Well, two that come to mind off the top of my head. Obviously, photography is painting with light. So always being aware of where your light source is. Like if you want a dark and shadowy, moody picture, then, you don't need to be front lit. But if you want details to show up and not for it to be grainy and for the subject that you have in your mind's eye of what matters most to you, then you need to pay attention to where the light source is coming from. That could be a flash, that could be a window, that could be the sun. It could be a reflection. There's a lot of cool things you could do. So you don't necessarily need big, expensive gear to make a massive difference in the images that you're taking. And then the second thing is being aware of what's in your background. I think a lot of times people go, just stand here. And you're like, there's a garbage can behind you. I remember one time, actually, my husband and I were on the boat to Martha's Vineyard. And this couple said, we'll take your photo. And then there's this big life preserver and something else on the side of us. And it looked ridiculous. And I'm like, why would you have us stand here? Or something that sticks out of what appears to be sticking out of someone's head, like a light post or something like that. So those two things, like paying attention to where your light's coming from and just take that extra second and look what's in your background so that, you don't have to use any of those magic editing tools to remove all the junk that you didn't intend to be put in the picture in the first place. And also people don't get close enough a lot of times. I think just get closer to your subject. It's more interesting. Shoot from a different angle. I think when it comes to kids, get on their level. It's so easy as adults to be leering and standing over a child or over your pet. And that's just not the same view as if you're on the floor with them and you're shooting from their perspective. It's so much cooler to be a part of their immersive world. So those are a handful of things I think that, and this applies to anybody who ever picks up a camera.
And then what about, I feel like another thing I've seen a lot of people who are like technically gifted, or they're really, really good at editing and but they kind of have nothing to say. And what would be your advice to that person where they are the talented, they don't need to improve their technical photography skills. They want to become more of a storyteller or a documentarian. How does that work?
Well, for me, I've often said when I describe my kind of work is that my lens is an extension of my heart. So if my camera lens is focused on something, what is the connection point? What is the human connection? And I think, again, we could use our cameras to keep us separated, or we can use them to make it closer, make the human contact better to tell the story. So going back to curiosity, like we talked about earlier, listening is a lot of times before I take photos, I talk to people for a long time, especially if you're doing portrait work. People don't necessarily, unless they're, stage performers, come on, let's go, we're ready. There takes a little bit of comfort and trust and all these things that really matter. So it's read the room, give yourself some grace. It's rare unless, you're at a press event and you just got to make it happen to get the shot. But I think for the most part, staying curious, remembering that there's people on both sides of the camera and connecting with them and listening to what they have to say so that emotion, that connection shows up in the image.
And then speaking of connection and really like a heart-driven project, you have and is this ongoing or you've wrapped it up recently, the 52 Phenomenal Women?
Well, the portrait side of that has wrapped. I did that for 2 years. So once a week, I highlighted a woman that we knew or didn't know. It quickly grew into the spider web of you need to meet so-and-so to do portrait of them. And then in their own words, have them address what is phenomenal about them right now today. And it was a really incredible exercise.
And what did you learn from those conversations?
Well, how uncomfortable most people are at accepting a compliment, myself included. I even threw myself into the subject, into the project just to prove that, I understand what you're feeling, that empathy level. But how vital it is and how once people sit down, this exercise, initially I was interviewing them. And that's great. You ask a question, they give you a response. But when they had to sit and think about what they would acknowledge, it's different than their bio, their LinkedIn profile. There are all these different things. I am, I do. So they wrote about a phenomenal aspect. It was really transformative. And I think what people don't necessarily recognize is that it's the simple things that maybe you do repeatedly that make you unique. That is what makes you phenomenal right now.
And that's so true. I found that to be true in interviews that I think people skew more humble and self-effacing than you might realize. And most people don't have a lot of experience talking about themselves.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I would say I work in a world where a lot of people are media trained, so they know how to give you their bullet points. But at the same time, when you want to know like the everyday person that has such rich tapestry of their lives to share, then that requires the person on the other side to really tease that out of them, to give, again, going back to that trust factor, to let them know that they can let their guard down enough to shine. because maybe their background is we can't brag. That's not cool. Like we just can't talk about ourselves in that way. But I think just acknowledging it, Mel Robbins, author and everything, she's got this book out there called The High Five, and give yourself a high five in the mirror. I mean, it's that kind of concept. It's like, what if you gave 5 seconds a day to yourself so that you can now take that with you when you go out and interact with other people?
All right, now I'm going to put you on the spot. What is phenomenal about you, or what do you consider phenomenal about yourself?
Well, one of the things I'm super proud of is I can't stop learning. Like I am constantly going back to that idea of when we started the conversation, like taking things apart, putting them back together, figuring it out, reading about how things work. I was over 50 and I went back and I got my master's degree. So in that sense, I think that's phenomenal. I hope that more people are curious and want to do these things, but I do find that it's a little bit unique about me because it's just something that every day I'm like, what am I going to learn today? So that's one of my favorite things.
That's great. That's a good way to be. I'm curious about the origin of that project. One thing that has come up a lot on this podcast, talking to my fellow ghostwriters, is finding the story and the narrative in interesting source material isn't always easy, and there's a real skill to it. How did you decide the kind of shape and content and structure of that project?
Quite honestly, it was one of those things that just happened to inspire me. I often say that I was sitting on my chair in my family room when I just went, oh, I need to do this personal project. Now, I had plenty of regular work going on during my work day, but at this point, I just knew that there was something more I wanted to do. So the first thing that I did was I wanted to tie this to a way of giving back. And I looked up an organization, and the first one I contacted was Dress for Success in Chicago. And the director answered the phone immediately. And we had this amazing connection out of the box, like called her up, we're good to go. And that just gave massive energy and direction to this project. So anybody who participated, not only were they getting their story told, which was really cool, and many people, they weren't necessarily notables, were willing to do that, but they also donated a small portion to Dress for Success. So by the end of 2 years, we raised a good chunk of money towards making lives for other women better. And that was a really cool thing. So it came out of personal drive, I guess, something, taking my own creativity to a new level, because each week I didn't know where I was going, who I was meeting. So again, it keeps you on your toes. It keeps your skills sharp. Don't know where your lighting conditions are going to be when you're walking in to meet all these different women across the country. And that was a really amazing thing for me to do.
And for our listeners, what is Dress for Success?
Dress for Success is a nonprofit based in, well, it's actually not based in the States. I think it's in 120 cities or countries. But it is a foundation where they will suit women looking for jobs, so with the attire, but also give like job training, all different things, to whether you're in work transition, just getting into work for the first time, all these different things. So it's a really great way to help women get into the workforce. And
was there, when you were traveling and collecting those stories and working on that project, was there one that really stayed with you, or that really grabbed you as a moment where you just felt like, oh, okay, this is exactly what I need to be doing? Or
yeah, I actually had quite a few, but one in particular, the woman's name is Erica, and a friend of hers had nominated her. She was an advocate for lung cancer research. She was a young woman in her early 40s, mother of two, and never smoked a day in her life, and ended up with stage 4 lung cancer. So when I photographed her, it was about a year and a half before she passed. And it was all about joy. It was all about making the most of every moment you have, working with her family, working with her organization. She had the world's best outlook, and it's something that has stayed with me every day since I met her. And so, yeah, there were countless stories like that, a lot of different obstacles that people overcame. And it was just a very, very rewarding situation.
And what are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I've recently relaunched. So the 52 Phenomenal Women Project spun off during COVID as a podcast. And that had a full run of its first season. And then, life gets in the way. And it took a little pause. I went to school and stuff like that. And now it's back. And so that's a really very rewarding thing. We've gotten in like 8 episodes, I think, so far for season 2. And just continuing doing the photo work that I do, whether that's for Broadway in Chicago, my personal clients, that sort of thing.
Cool. And where can listeners find you?
Sure. Well, you can find me at amyboylephotography.com. That's my website. Instagram is Amy Boyle Photo. That's also counts for what was formerly known as Twitter. X, yes. And so Instagram, my website. I also have a blog at Amy Boyle Photo, and another place that you and I have connected, Charlie, is over Substack. So I'm on Substack as well.
Substack is so good.
Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailypros.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Amy's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.